Good morning from Chabad of Rechavia and Nachlaot in Yerushalayim. We are going to begin now learning the Tanya, and I've chosen a very special chapter of the Tanya, which should be soon on our Facebook page. It's the final part of the Tanya called Iggeret HaKodesh, special letters, holy letters that the Alter Rebbe, the Baal Tanya, Rabbi Shneir Zalman, wrote on an area of subjects. And after he passed away, his children decided to add the Iggeret HaKodesh to the Tanya. The Iggeret HaKodesh was, the different letters were written to different Chasidim. And what's special about the Iggeret HaKodesh is that many of the letters were written to his Chasidim in Eretz Yisrael. And as you can find in the different letters, that the Alter Rebbe writes how important it is to support Eretz Yisrael, as it's known that the Alter Rebbe founded the oldest tzedakah today called Kolel Chabad over 200 years ago in Eretz Yisrael to support the poor people living here in Eretz Yisrael. And so I would like to suggest that even though this letter specifically was not written to people, his Hasidim in Eretz Yisrael, in Israel, nor is the subject specifically for people in Eretz Yisrael, I would like to suggest that being that we have the zechut, the merit to be here in Eretz Yisrael and to have a Beit Chabad, and we are learning together this chapter, Yud Aleph, chapter 11, here in Eretz Yisrael, that the message, the powerful message that we're going to learn soon is appropriate even more so here than everywhere else in the world. And hopefully the fact that you're all participating in this special class will bring you tremendous bracha wherever in the world you are. The reason why I chose this chapter is because this chapter, Iggeret HaKodesh, number 11, Yud Aleph, beginning Lahaskilcha Bina, was the subject, the topic of this chapter is to explain that people should not be concerned about their materialistic problems. What's most important is to focus on the positive, to focus on the good. Because Hashem is good, and everything that Hashem does is good. Therefore, any issue or problem is really not a problem. This is a very deep subject, as we're going to learn soon. However, the Alter Rebbe begins the first two words of this chapter, Lahaskilcha Bina, which literally means to give you the understanding and appreciation of something very deep. Now one might think that he only wrote it for the elderly Hasidim, the scholarly Hasidim. And so the Alter Rebbe, this quote from the book of Daniel, the Alter Rebbe is giving us a message. Lahaskilcha Bina. Every single person that's going to pick up this letter, he's writing it for all of us, for all of Am Yisrael. That even though it's a deep subject, it is something that we can all hopefully understand and take to heart. That's number one. Number two, during the time of the Alter Rebbe, there were unfortunately different plagues as there were in Russia and in the old country. And the following story was related by the Alter Rebbe's brother, that he himself testified that the Alter Rebbe said the following statement, that it's very important to learn the subject of the ketoret, of bringing the incense that the Kohen would bring in the Beit HaMikdash. In fact, by divine providence, in last week's Parsha Kitisa and the week beforehand in Tetzaveh, the Torah tells us about how to make and how to offer these incense, the Ketoret, and this will take care of any plague, God forbid. About 100 years ago, almost exactly 100 years ago, there was a terrible plague, a terrible sickness of typhus, quickly infecting many people, and millions of people died, unfortunately, because of this plague and sickness. And what used to happen was, because they did not have any remedy that they knew for this sickness, they would send people outside of the city in order that they would be away from the general population. Besides for one doctor that would come and deal with it, help the ill people, no one would go, and unfortunately many of them would just pass away being ill. The Rav of Nikolaev, Rabbi Meir Shlomo Yanovsky, he was the grandfather of our Rebbe. He was the Rav, the chief rabbi of Nikolaev. Unfortunately, he also received this sickness of typhus. And so naturally he was sent out of Nikolaev, out of the city, and he was in a certain home, and he had a friend, Reb Asher Grossman. And this Asher was a great chassid, and he decided that he wanted to do something special in order to make sure that Rav Yanovsky remains alive. And so every day he took the Tanya and this chapter, Iggeret HaKodesh, number 11, and he read this chapter under the window, just outside the home, and he read this chapter out loud, so that Rabbi Meir Shlomo Yanovsky should be able to hear this chapter, and hopefully it will help. The story goes that after a month, Rabbi Yanovsky healed from the typhus illness. And he told over afterwards that it was thanks to this chapter that his friend, Rabbi Moshe, said under the window so that he could hear, that gave him the encouragement to be able to overcome the terrible sickness. I'm not sure if the chapter is already on Facebook, but you can open up your own Tanya in Iggeret HaKodesh. Do we have it on Facebook? Okay, the chapter is there, and on our Facebook page of Chabad of Rechavia, and we're going to read a few words at a time and translate them and hopefully give some explanation. Lahaskilcha bina, to be able to give you to understand a very intellectual, deep concept. Ki lo zu haderech yishkon or Hashem. This is not the way that Hashem's light will rest. Lihiyot chafetz b'chaye b'sarim, in order to desire in the life of flesh, ubani, and children, umezoni, and food, which means parnasa, livelihood. These are general concepts which are very, very dear to a person and also very materialistic. Chaye besarim is the life that we run, and in general it's made up of very basic materialistic things. Ubani, the blessing that a person has children, is also physical, mundane, and a person wants children to be healthy and to be successful. Umizoni is food. This is obviously mundane. A person wants to have parnasa. A person wants to have livelihood. This is not the way where Hashem's light will rest if a person is head and entire body immersed into these subjects. Why? Ki al zeh amru azal, for our sages have taught about this subject, batel ritzoncha. The Alter Rebbe over here is referring to what it says in Pirkei Avot, the Ethics of Our Fathers, chapter 2, Mishnah 4. And the Mishnah tells us as follows, that a person should batel ritzoncha mipnei ritzono, k'dei sheyevatel ritzon acharim mipnei ritzonecha. We should nullify our own personal desires for Hashem's great desire, in order that Hashem should nullify other people's desires for ours. In other words, in order that we should be able to focus our attention exclusively to Hashem. Let's continue, and then we'll come back to explain, Bezrat Hashem. Dahainu, that means, Sheyeh ritzono, that a person's own will and desire should be batel b'mtziut, should be totally nullified. V'lo yelo shum ratzon klal, a person should not have any personal desires. Be'inyanei olam hazeh, in the subjects of this world, in other words, the physical and mundane world. Kulam, all of them. Hanichlalim, which they are all included in these three main subjects. Bibane, with children and family. Chaye, life, running your life. Eating, drinking, business, running your life. Umezone, and food. Pretty much everything, every materialistic desire can be included in these three subjects. Ukamayim razal, and as our sages say, shal korchach atachai, that it's against our will that we're alive. This is also referring to Pirkei Avot, the Ethics of Our Fathers. One of the last words of chapter 4, Perek Dalid, where the Mishnah says, Al korchach atachai, it is against our will that we are alive. So let's try to touch on a couple of subjects, because beginning from the next paragraph, we're going to really get into the subject of the explanation of how it's possible that a person should not be overly concerned, and perhaps not even be concerned at all, regards to troubles in his own personal life and in the mundane world. So firstly, let's touch upon something from this week's Parsha, Parashat Vayakel. And right in the beginning of the Parsha, the Torah tells us about the mitzvah of Shabbat. Not only a few weeks ago we read it in the Aseret HaDibrot, in the Ten Commandments, but also we read it right in connection to the Mishkan. Right before the Torah, Moshe tells us which items to bring for the Mishkan. And so there's something very interesting over there. If you pay attention, in the second or third verse, it says, Sheshet Yamim Te'aseh Melacha. 6 days a week, your work should be done. Uvayom Hashvi'i Shabbat Lashem. And on the seventh day, it should be a resting day for Hashem. If you think about the grammar of the word te'aseh, it's not as it usually should be said. It should seemingly have been written Sheshet Yamim, 6 days, ta'aseh melacha. You should do work. Te'aseh means work should be done for you. Today, when unfortunately so many people are not at work, they probably all hope that the work should be done for us. And we give a bracha that everyone should really have work and parnasa as they need. But the reason why the Torah says te'aseh, the work should be done for us, is a very strong message on how we're supposed to view the whole subject of parnasa and livelihood that we have in our families. Some people think that I am the one who provides for my family. Kochi va'otzem yadi asa li et hachayil hazeh. It is my strength and my talents that Hashem gave me that I am the one to provide. But they don't realize that we are going to make the exact amount of money that Hashem had intended for us in Rosh Hashanah. Not 1 penny more, not 1 penny less. Not one agura more, not one agura less. So what's our job? Our job is to go to work, make a framework for Hashem's blessing to come down into our lives. If we just sit at home, we don't do work. So it's almost like Hashem bringing rain on earth that has not been plowed and has not been prepared. And so the rain is not going to have any effect. And nothing is going to grow. No fruit, no vegetables, no flowers. Nothing is going to grow. No trees. So we have to make the keli. We have to make the vessel. That's our obligation. And then pray to Hashem that His bracha should come automatically. What's the difference between these two scenarios? The difference is that in the second scenario, where we only prepare a framework, we do our best. In that case, we don't overwork. We don't become a workaholic. We just work the exact amount of time that Hashem wants us to. Whether it's 9 to 5, or here in Israel, people that work American hours, I guess that would be somewhere like the evening hours throughout the middle of the night. But we do our effort. We do the regular hours that is in our ability to be able to work. And then, te'aseh melacha, the work will be done for us. This is a great example for the fact that we should not be our entire body immersed into our work, into our parnasa and livelihood. This still does not explain what the Alter Rebbe is going to explain soon, that if someone has a problem, God forbid, or an issue, that it shouldn't bother us at all. Trusting and believing that it's all literally from Hashem. And Bezrat Hashem, and in the continuation of the chapter, of this parak, we're going to get into this subject. But before we do that, just one more point regarding Batel Ritzoncha. We quoted earlier that the Mishnah says in the Ethics of Our Fathers that Hashem wants from us that we should nullify our own personal desires, Ritzoncha, for Hashem's. This is the key with which the Alter Rebbe opens this chapter, paves the way. What is the concept? What is the concept of Ratzon? Ratzon is a will, is a very strong desire. If you think about it, Hashem created us with 3 levels of intellect: Chabad, Chachma, Bina, and Da'at, wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, and the 7 midot, the 7 levels, the 7 attributes, the 7 levels of emotion: Chesed, Gevura, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malchut. And each one is a different way how we express ourselves. Now, Ratzon, if you really want to do something, that's above everything. That's like the crown. So the head has the 3 levels of intellect. The heart and the body is compared to the 7 levels of emotion. And the Ratzon is above. If you really, really want something, you will make sure that it happens. Even if it doesn't make 100% sense, or if it doesn't make any sense. Even if usually this is something which you like, and you feel for, but right now, if you have a desire, then you can override everything. That's why the Ratzon is like the Keter. It's like the crown on top. And therefore, what our obligation is, to try to fit our Ratzon into Hashem's Ratzon. We know that Hashem's will, Hashem's desire is the right thing. And sometimes we're not really in the state of mind to do what Hashem wants us to do. Nevertheless, when we realize that it's Hashem's Ratzon, Mipnei Ritzono, to quote the Mishnah, for His Ratzon, for His desire, then we can try to fit our Ratzon into His. To the extent that He says in line number 4, Sheyeh Ritzono batel b'mtziut, That's unbelievable. It's a very, very deep level. And hopefully it will be clarified in the continuation of this chapter. But batel b'mtziut means that my own personal ratzon, our own personal desires, are totally nullified. In other words, included in Hashem's ratzon. And once we're part of Hashem's ratzon, Hashem's will, Hashem's desire, the Almighty Ein Sof, the infinite Hashem, then we can hopefully try and aspire to try to lead our lives the way Hashem wants us to. And then, if God forbid there's a problem, we'll realize that it's not a problem. Because we, and all of our desires, and all of our seichel, all of our intellect, and emotion and feelings, are nothing. Because we're all part of Him. So if we're part of Him, then everything should fit into place. Now, let's explain the last line that we just read. Okamai Merazal, as it says in our sages, also from the ethics of our fathers, Shal karchach atachai, against your will you live. And the Mishnah gives a whole list over there. Al karchach atanolad, against your will you were born. Al karchach atachai, against your will you live. Al karchach ata met, against your will you die. Al karchach, against your will we do everything. So the famous question is, how could you have the same person that against your will you live, and against your will you die? Make up your mind. If it's against your will that you're alive, then you don't want to be alive. So it shouldn't be a problem for someone not to live. But if we say that it's against your will that you die, that means you want to live. So how could you say, in the previous words, it's against your will that you live? And the answer is obviously that in each scenario, it depends where we're discussing. Before a person comes down to the world, before the neshama comes down into a body, then the neshama enjoys the radiant light of Hashem's holy throne, then true, a person doesn't want to come down to the world. The neshama wants to remain above. But once a person comes down into the world and sees what kind of temptations there are over here, and what kind of experiences a person can experience in this world, and the neshama doesn't want to go back up. But at the end of the day, the entire world runs exactly the way Hashem wants it to run. And He's the one that decides for us how we should run our lives and when each thing should happen. Bezrat Hashem, we're going to start now the Ubir Ha'inyan, and tomorrow morning we're going to share with you a fascinating introduction to this deep concept that the Alter Rebbe is going to share with us. But let's start the text. Ubir Ha'inyan, this is the beginning of the new paragraph, a few lines down from the beginning of the chapter. Ubir Ha'inyan, the explanation of the subject is as follows. Hurak emunah amitit biyotzer bereshit, is only true and pure emunah, faith in Hashem, in the Creator of the world. Dehainu, that is, shabriya yesh me'ayin, that the creation of the world is something from nothing, ex nihilo. Hanikra Reishit Chochma, which is the beginning of Chochma. Vehi Chochmato, and this is His wisdom, Hashem's wisdom, She'eina Museget L'shum Nivra, which cannot be grasped by any creation. This creation that Hashem has created, Habri'ah Hazot, this creation, He bechol eit v'rega, is at every moment and every time. It's not only 5,780 years ago. Rather, every moment Hashem continues to create the world. Shemithavim kol habruim yesh me'ayin, all of the creations of Hashem are recreated ex nihilo mechochmato yitbarach, from Hashem's holy wisdom. Hamechayet hakol, which Hashem gives everything life. And that's how we have to believe and have faith in Hashem, that this is the truth. This is the fact. That Hashem recreates the world at every moment from nothing. Now, let's understand for a moment, what does it mean that Hashem creates the world something from nothing? You see, in our world, it's very hard for us to grasp such a concept, because we don't really have this idea of creating something from nothing. Us, as human beings, the maximum we can do is to recreate. So let's say, for example, the classical explanation is, if you want to make a table or a pot, you take a piece of metal and you reshape the metal. Or you take a tree and you cut the wood and you make a plank of wood out of it. But for us, human beings, to recreate, to create something from nothing is almost impossible. The closest that we know what it means to create something from nothing is creating a child, creating a baby. That this amazing blessing from Hashem, that two individuals, a husband and a wife, can become a father and a mother, is the greatest bracha that there can be. Because Hashem gives us the ability to be able to come as close as possible to the Creator. And so this idea that Hashem creates something from nothing is very powerful. That means that Hashem at every moment recreates the entire world. Now, if we're talking about reshaping something or recreating something, not yesh me'ayin, so once you create the object, then it pretty much can remain there, because you didn't make anything new. You simply recreated, reshaped. But once we talk about the concept of yesh me'ayin, creating something from nothing, ex nihilo, that's a whole other subject. That means that the Creator ought to be involved in the sustenance of this object at every single moment. If, for a split second, the Creator decides to do something else and stop being involved in creating this object, then it ceases to exist. Because it's totally dependent on the Creator. This idea should hopefully give us a lot of insight and inspiration into the entire concept of bitachon. If we view Hashem as having created the world 5,780 years ago, and He doesn't recreate it every single moment, just He did it a long time ago, then it's nice, we can have respect for Him, but it may have less of a connection to us. But the moment that we realize that A, Hashem created this entire world from nothing, and B, He continues to create the world from nothing every single moment, that means that we are totally dependent on Him. Every single ounce, every single fiber of our being is totally 100%, 1,000% dependent on Him. So hopefully this is a great way to start off this chapter. Because even though it might be difficult to grasp this concept, that everything that happens in our lives, including things which seem to be troublesome, are all good, nevertheless, at least knowing the fact, at least the knowledge that Hashem is the one who stands behind us at every single moment, and in every single detail in our lives. Hopefully, at least the knowledge will put things in perspective for us, and allow us to start learning about Hashem, and learning about how great Hashem is, and how every single object in the world is really part of Him. And hopefully, in the future classes, we will be able to understand on a much more personal level this concept of how we can appreciate Hashem at every step of our lives. And hopefully, of course, this will bring bracha to all of those who need refuah shalema, to all of those who are quarantined should be healthy, and those that have already been infected should be disinfected by the terrible coronavirus, and we should be able to share many more classes on Chassidut and inspiration from the Torah. Because at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day, Torah magina umatzla. Torah protects us from any kind of thing that might, God forbid, be a threat to the health of Am Yisrael and the entire world. Shalom, shalom.